Kyoto, the former capital of Japan, is known for its beautiful temples, gardens, imperial palace, and traditional wooden houses, as well as its cultural heritage in kaiseki cuisine and geisha. It is a dream travel destination for many, and is the city in Japan that gets the most tourists. However, if we go back in time, we see a very different picture. Along the river where couples sit today, executions took place for hundreds of years. Heads displayed on the nearby bridge. Temples used beggars to do dirty work, and villages of outcasts who lived outside the system barely recognized as humans existed. This is the dark history of Kyoto, the origin of the untouchable villages. During early Japan by the Kamo River, which runs through the eastern side of Kyoto, crowds gathered to see theatrical performances known as sarugaku, or monkey fun. But another spectacle that drew crowds was public executions. At the time of the Rokujyo system, which was an early law system inspired by Chinese legalism and Confucianism, while the emperor's power was still strong, executions and punishments were performed by a people called the monobe. At the time, punishments were carried out in squares across the town. But as temples and nobles grew in power and the power of the emperor waned, instead of the monobe, ex-criminals were used to do these tasks. And because nobles were the ones who had to write the letters of execution and they didn't like to do so, they stopped. And so for a period, there were no longer executions. As the power of the samurai of eastern Japan and Kamakura rose, they went to Kyoto and crossed the Kamo River, and under the Tandai, who were chiefs of the Kamakura shogunate in Kyoto, who did security as well as judicial affairs for Western Japan, negotiation with the emperor, as well as acting as a secret police of sorts. Under them, the samurais once again began to do executions, this time by the Kamo River. In the nearby temples, there were a lot of monks. All of these different temples belonged to the Jishu Buddhism sect. The monks from these temples would come to the execution site and say the rites of passage for the people who were executed. When performing the executions, the samurai would enlist the help of local beggars. These beggars were referred to as hinin, or non-humans. Hinin, however, did not only refer to beggars, it also referred to people with leprosy, which was seen as an incurable and deadly disease, not to mention people who were released from prison, so ex-criminals. As the Rokujyo system collapsed, so went the system of power it had supported as well. As a result of the emperor's power weakening, the larger temples in Kyoto started acting as if they controlled and were responsible for the land around them. As a result, they had to carry out punishment and penal duties, and in order to enact these, they also enlisted the help of the hinin, the beggars in the area, as well as the former criminals. Another act they were made to do was to clean up the corpses of animals in the vicinity of the temples, because when coming into contact with death and blood, especially of animals, you incur a lot of kegare or kegare, which is defilement, as seen in the traditional Shintoist belief of purity versus defilement. Over time, responsibilities for the hinin were expanded to guard duties and more direct involvements in punishment. And these different responsibilities were all combined into one term, which was keikei-shiaku. Many hinin settled along the banks of the river of Kamo, and accordingly came to be named the Kawaramono. Kawaramono quite literally meaning people of the riverbanks. Kawaramono were both those who performed the earlier mentioned keikei-shiaku, but also the ones who did skinning and leather tanning. The job of cleaning up animal carcasses fell to both the hinin as well as the Kawaramono. This act was called kiyome, or purification. The difference, however, was that the Kawaramono were the first ones to skin the animals and tan the hides. As the number of samurai increased and wars increased as well, Kawaramono were the ones who met the demand for leather, and so, because of the increasing demand for leather, they were able to get a steady job in leatherworking as well as keikei-shiaku. But as their jobs were related to their origins, they were discriminated against and looked upon with despise by the people around them. Interestingly, while both Kawaramono and hinin were subordinates of the local shrines, the Kawaramono managed to escape that influence by creating stronger bonds with the samurai. As a result, they were able to create their own independent community. One of the villages made this way was Rokujyo Mura, or Rokujyo village. Now, it didn't come to be called that until the Edo period in around 1663. It was located around the western bank of the Kamo River, east of the Kankoji. temple. Under Hideyoshi's control, the Kawaramono came to be called Kawata instead. Rokujyo village also fell under Hideyoshi's control, and they were given the rights to the land. Tembu was another village of Kawata, and along with Rokujyo village, both were exempted from taxation. Tembu was one of the most powerful Kawata villages, and was about half a hectare in size, whereas Rokujyo village was estimated at about 1 to 2 hectares, though likely closer to 1 in size. The reason the villages were exempt from taxation was because of their performed duties as keikei-shiyaku, as well as the leather supplied from them. And while it did function as a recognition of their work, at the same time it was also an indirect order for them to continue doing it. Even as circumstances changed, with Nobunaga becoming Hideyoshi, becoming Tokugawa, the village still had to continue doing its keikei-shiyaku nonetheless. The right to collect the dead animals in the nearby area was given to every Kawata village. So every village had their own surrounding area, and there they could collect the corpses of animals. These grass areas around the villages came to be called kusajo, which were grasslands, and it became sort of a common custom to not interfere with each other, and as a result, the different villages more or less flourished and had stable work for many years. And even as the period of warring states came to a close, there was still work for the Kawata for a time, as the samurai were still maintaining their equipment. For now. In order to control the Kawata villages, which, as mentioned earlier, were perceived as rather powerful at the time, the Tokugawa shogunate appointed the Shimomura clan to head all the Kawata villages, which numbered about 52 at the time. Under their control, villages from Kyoto, Shiga, and Osaka were all made to do public duties, such as cleaning Nijo Castle. It is said that the Shimomura clan originated from Tembu village, but actually spent most of their time in Kyoto, where they lived a lavish lifestyle, receiving as much as 120 koku from the shogunate, which was equivalent to what a hatamoto, which is a direct subordinate of the shogun, would receive. So while the different villages were deployed when duties had to be done, in essence it was really only the big 5, the biggest of the villages around Kyoto, who were really sent to do things. Essentially, the Shimomura clan would receive orders from the Kyoto Shogun Administrative Office, the Bugyo, as it were. And then they would have to carry out those orders, and they would give them to the villages. During the Edo period, the Rokujyo village was located on the western side of the Kamo River, and although it was called a village, it did not do any farming. Only the processing of dead cattle and cows and handling their cattle and cows. Only the processing of dead cattle and horses, tanning their hides, and working related leather products. The size of the village in the earlier periods was unknown, but it was estimated at around 100 households. Rokujyo was likely responsible for the central Kyoto area, and so when animals died within and around the city, they were the ones who would be called upon to remove the animals and deal with them. If the animals were too far away, they would go and just skin the animal, bringing back the skin, but usually they would prefer to take the entire animal, bring it back to their working place near the river, skin it and dissect it, then washing the hide and submerging it in salt. Rokujyo would also send a large portion of their hides to Osaka, as there was a cellar there in Watabe village, and they also had superior techniques for leather processing. The leather made in Rokujyo village was usually used for taiko drums and the straps of sandals, as well as the inner lining of the sandals as well, which was made from deer leather. But as deer play a special role in Shintoism, the nearby temple, the Hachiman Temple in 1723, requested a ban on the production of deer hide related items. That request was made to the Bugyo, the shogunate administration in Kyoto. After a 2-year trial, the ban was enacted, and of course the villagers, especially the deer hide makers in Tembu as well as Rokujyo, tried to repeal this decision again and again. And in 1731 they succeeded, but under the condition that they could only use deer hide for smaller items and handiwork. Now, if you're enjoying this video so far, please consider liking it. It has been rough making it because this has been in between exams, and actually there doesn't really exist anything on this history and this topic in English, so I've had to manually translate a number of Japanese sources, and it has taken a while. But with that, back to the video. The tasks of keikei shiaku, as well as cleaning Nijo Castle, were both duties that were held by Rokujyo village. It was at the same time a public role, a duty, and a form of taxation. Essentially, it was forced labor. Every year, 227 laborers were sent to clean Nijo Castle. And depending on the type of work, a number of laborers were also sent to various other activities, such as, and this one is really odd, at least I thought so, 120 people were sent to crucifixion duty. I didn't think you would find crucifixion in Japan, but 120 people were sent for it every year. So that was interesting. 19 people were sent for the death sentence, with 80 sent to man the prison gates, as well as 10 people sent to tattoo the prisoners. Yeah, there were many more interesting cases and places where the laborers were sent, but in general, the laborers sent were split 50-50 between Rokujyo village and Tembu village, with Rokujyo also sending people from their subordinate villages. The number of punishment cases varied by year, with at most 70 in 1 year and at its lowest point only 1 case. Also, twice a year, 60 people were sent to clean the vicinity of the prison. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it was especially the 5 big villages around Kyoto and around Rokujyo village specifically that usually ended up doing these duties. And the way that it worked was all of the smaller villages would send money so that the bigger villages would handle these duties in their stead. In 1708, the third head of the Shimomura family, Bunraku, died. However, the shogunate would not allow his younger brother to succeed him, and so the family died out. Following this, the villagers were exempt from having to clean Nijo Castle, and while you would think that would be a welcome thing, no less than 1 year later, a combination of village leaders brought a co-signed signature pleading to have that work back. Well, the shogunate granted that request, and so they got back to cleaning the castle. And instead of the Shimomura clan, who were managing the Kawata villages before, it now fell to the Tembu village, as well as the Rokujyo village, to manage all of the others, and they became sort of the shared head of the Kawata. One of the suspected reasons as to why they would willingly want to go back to cleaning the castle was that they didn't have many other jobs available to them, and so this was about what they could get. Possibly. In 1708, it was then added to their keikei shiaku duties that they had to patrol the city of Kyoto. And by 1720, they came to be called the village of officials, as they were ordered to make arrests as well. So they started doing police duties as well. Until after the Genroku period from 1688 till 1704, the word etta, which means much filth and was referring to the Kawata, was only used internally in the Tokugawa shogunate. However, after the Genroku period, it started becoming more widely used, for example in Kyoto as well. With the class system during the Edo period, the etta and the hinin were both existences falling outside the system. But even so, in villages like Rokujyo, there were further subdivisions of the etta. So in Rokujyo, there were 4 groupings of individuals. First up, we had the Toshiori, which was the village leader, if you will. Under them, there were the Kumigashira. They were the group leaders. And then we had Kokashira, which were section leaders, and finally Teshita, which were subordinates or underlings, and that was the rest of the people. While Toshiori controlled the village's functioning as village administration officials, at the same time they had to accommodate the local Tokugawa administration's requests and lead as village representatives in times of conflict between villages. There were many Toshiori in Tembu village, but the number changed over time. This wasn't the case in Rokujyo village. Here the number was fixed, and sort of went to show how powerful they were in their standing. The shogunate would relay their messages through the Toshiori to the people, and so the oldest among them would read out the decrees to the people and make sure that they followed the laws and enacted them properly. And then annually between August and September there was a religious population census. So it was the important duty of the Toshiori to go around and get all the residents of the villages to sign these papers and then deliver them to the Bugyo. It was essentially a family census or a family registration system. However, the most important duty of the Toshiori was to catch and punish criminals. And so if there was a crime scene, the Toshiori had to be present themselves. Now, for the specifics, under a Toshiori, there were 30 Kumigashira. and the rest of the village obeyed them as teshita, as subordinates. The families who served as kumigashira were fixed, and they would send 2 people at a time in rotation to do duties. And what they would do was collect money from the villagers. Additionally, there were 3 kokashira, section leaders, who would be appointed directly by the Toshiori and paid indirect wages from them as well. The Toshiori who gathered the land tax would then keep that as payment for themselves. The kumigashira, the group leaders, would be exempt from having to pay taxes, which was essentially their payment. So the way the system functioned was that the Toshiori as well as the kumigashira were essentially the village administrators who would employ the kogashira to do their job, their bidding, if you will. Now, even though the rest of the villagers were called teshita and subordinates, there was another division among those as well. And this was between those who owned a home and those who didn't. So those who owned homes had the right to participate in village matters, in village politics, if you will. But at the same time, they had to perform duties for the village. For those who were renting homes instead, they had no obligation to do duties in the village, but at the same time, they didn't have any say in the village matters. In 1704, the split between homeowners and renters was 39 homes owned, equaling 213 people, and 129 homes rented, equating 519 people, more than double the owners. Now, among the duties of punishment, there was the person who did the beheading. In earlier periods, it was a samurai, but over time, the Hinin got to do this as well. And in the case of Tembu Mura, for example, the beheader was called a matajiro. The matajiro that Tembu village sent would be presumably was sent from the lowest layer, so that would be the home renters, were the ones who were sent out as matajiro, as well as in the keikei, shiaku, and other duties. The governing structure of Rokujyo village was as described above, but it is important to emphasize that the most important function of the village was the keikei shiaku, more than anything else. The system of the villages was built around the duty to do guarding, policing, standing watch by the prison gates, etc., and executions. This was what the system was built around. Now, in a normal village, there would be a village chief, a shoya, and then there would be a supporting village official or supporting chief who was a kimuiri. And while you could say the Toshiori functioned like a shoya, like a village chief, there was no similar role to the supporting administrative leader. Also, in the Etta villages, the Buraku, if you will, the common people were called subordinates, and they didn't really have much representation, as opposed to other villages where there was more representation for the common people. In short, at the behest of the Toshiori, who exerted strong authority, an organization structure focused around executing the duties given to them by the shogunate emerged, and that very organizational structure became the actual structure of the village. Rokujyo village was a village with stable income from leatherworking as well as keikei shiaku. However, it was under extremely strict control of the Toshiori. You couldn't have an acquaintance stay the night or accommodate someone without the explicit permission of the Toshiori. And also, if somebody bewildered wandered into the village, the Toshiori themselves would go up to them and question them about what they were doing there. And if they in any way found them suspicious, they would detain them and take them to the shogunate's administration office, the Bugyo. If a person ran away or disappeared, their belongings would go to the remaining family members or relatives. But if a person died and had no relatives or family, their belongings would go to a nearby temple, their dannadera. So the dannadera is part of the danka system, where a family is associated with a Buddhist temple in the vicinity. All citizens were forced to register with this system during the Tokugawa period. Previously, you could register with a temple, but it was voluntary. But Tokugawa made it involuntary? Compulsory. Essentially, the system was turned into a citizen registration network. And the idea was to stop the profusion of Christianity and to find hidden Christians. Now, it soon became government mandated and a temple-run system to monitor and control the whole population. For this reason, it survived intact even after they had essentially gotten rid of Christianity. It's a weird thing because citizens had to receive a terauke as well, which is why it's sometimes also called a terauke system, where tera means temple and uke means certificate. So the temple would issue a certificate saying that you weren't a Christian. This system was abolished during the Meiji period, but it still exists today, but now on a voluntary basis instead, where you can connect your family to a temple, and this is actually one of the main ways that temples today still receive their funding. With that said, let's get back on track. As for the village, there were various rules, but the number one rule was that you couldn't set fires. I'm assuming it's because of Japan's hot climate and because everything was built out of wood, and so fires would just spread out of control instantly with how closely people were living. But if you did that within the same day, you would be banished forever, and there was very little chance you were ever forgiven or let back in. But even in a village which was controlled so tightly and held and was essentially peaceful, something unexpected arose in 1707 when suddenly they were told to move the entire village. And this happened because the Chonin had set their eyes on the land and wanted to develop it. So the higher class of commoners / merchants had said that they wanted that piece of land, and so the feudal lord Myohoin, who was also in charge of the village, accepted that and told the Tokugawa administration in Kyoto to move along or to do it. And I'm sorry I'm rambling, but here is just that. Isn't that crazy? Honestly, I mean, a village has been in the same place and just grown for like 400 or 500 years, possibly more. And then a higher class just goes, we want where you live, get out of the way. And an entire village with history and everything else is just told to move. That's crazy to me. Anyway, I'll get back on point. Rokujyo village would be moved to the south of Shichijo Street and occupy a part of the existing Yanagihara's village. To the east, west, and south ran the Takasa River, and to the north was Omiya, essentially placing it within a triangular plot of land. With this, Rokujyo village was far from both the prison and the execution grounds. Not to mention the new area was a low ground basin prone to flooding, and as such the villagers obviously resisted, but accepted the move on the conditions that the ground level be raised by 3 taku, about 90 centimeters, shy of a meter, and they would receive 1,050 silver coins as compensation for the condition of the land. When they initially agreed to move, the decided payment for the move itself was 500 kang, a kang being equivalent to 1,000 monk during the Edo period. This agreement was met, but the village had also requested getting twice the land that they already had because their population was increasing as much as it was and they didn't have enough space. That condition, however, was not met. Now, Rokujyo's population around this time was 188 households, or about 789 people. So just for reference, the size of the rest of the 5 villages in Kyoto were as follows. Tembu village had 138 households with 590 people. Kawasaki village, 44 households, 233 people. Nokuji village, 46 households and 123 people. Kitakoji, 20 households, 116 people. As can be seen here, Rokujyo was the largest village. According to the monk Maeda Gei's letter of land recognition from 1590, Rokujyo village's area at the time covered 2 cho, just under 2 hectares. But as half was farmland owned by a Tempu village for hide and leather processing, their actual size was about 1 chobu, or just shy of 1 hectare. In other words, the average plot of land per house was shy of 16 tsubo. 1 tsubo equaling 3.31 square meters, equaling a total of 52.86 square meters. So the area suffered from overpopulation, to put it mildly, which was why they desired more space for the move. But as they had to stay as close as possible to Kyoto to work their duties, they ended up being moved to an area about the same size. As the Toshiyori had feared, the population continued increasing year over year, and living conditions kept worsening as a result. For that reason, in 1726, 3 men made an appeal to the shogunate's administration office to be able to develop some land to the south. Now, the Toshiyori feared that this could weaken their position of power, and so they got in the way, and it was denied. But shortly after, in 1731, resident of Tempu village, acting as Toshiyori of Rokujyo village, Yosanbe, and Toshiyori of Tempu village, Genzaimon, cooperated and requested permission to develop the same farmland, and this time permission was granted. So during the beginning of the Meiji period, it had been used to mint coins to make money, and at that time it was called zeniza. The new village then came to be called Zeniza Seki, which literally just means the traces of Zeniza. Development of this village was spearheaded by Tempu village, but it was really a sister village, or rather a subordinate village of Rokujyo. The following year, according to the Bugyo, the population of Rokujyo village was 636, with just under 200 people having moved to the new Senizaseki village. As a result of the expansion, the population of Rokujyo dropped momentarily, but then the population of both villages continued growing. By 1744, about 12 years later, Rokujyo village's population had grown to 959 people, even more than before the expansion. Senizaseki village had also increased their population to 417 people. As a result of the continuing population growth, in 1843, to the east of Rokujyo village on the grassland which belonged to Tembu village, another residential area was developed, and it was called Onishigumi. The area contributed 25 koku of tribute per year to Tembu village, as well as contributing laborers for Keikei Shiaku. And this village was managed by 6 kumigashira, so 6 group leaders were sent to manage the village. What brought about enough of a population increase to warrant building 2 new villages in 100 years was, in part, the increase of demand for Keikei Shiaku, so the guarding duties and punishment duties, etc. But that doesn't explain the full picture, because what was perhaps more significant was the increase in production from the leather industries. Now, the leather industry obviously was very successful during the Warring States period, but after the war ended, it started to wane. But this changed when, or rather the industry was revitalized as they began creating other leather-related products, such as everyday clothing, wallets, cigarette cases, leather jackets, and coats, etc. However, high-quality leather was needed for these products, and only Watanabe village in Osaka and Takaki village in Harima had the technique to make high-quality tan leather. As a result, while they flourished, many other smaller villages were in decline. The revitalization of the entire leather industry, however, was triggered by a boom brought about by Setta. Setta is a type of sandal shoe, where the heel and the straps are made of leather. They already existed during the Sengoku period, but they just were only worn by samurai and monks and some connoisseurs. But over time, they began to be used by more common people as well, especially around the Obon festival. Now, these were fairly expensive shoes, and so people didn't buy new ones if they were broken, but instead had them repaired. And the only people who were allowed to make these repairs were the Etta. And so Etta created businesses around all aspects of Setta production and maintenance, which brought about a flourishing leather industry, which in turn led to the population increase. So Rokujyo village of the past is what is today called the Sujin area in Kyoto, with Rokujyo's southward expansion Senizaseki being the current-day southern part of Sujin. In 1871, with the Emancipation Edict, when you could no longer refer to people as Etta and Hinin, and instead you began using words like Burakumin and Buraku to talk about the areas. You can see more about that in this earlier video of mine on the history of the Untouchables, the Burakumin. But then in 1889, the municipal system was created. As a result, Otagi-gun was combined into, or with, Ki-gun, and as a result came Yanagi town. Now, in 1899, a bank by the name of Yanagihara Bank was created. This was created by the mayor of the town, Tamizo Akashi, along with locals, especially with private money, which was collected by various businessmen of the Buraku minority. It was an important institution as it helped with the construction of local schools and businesses, because Burakumin were unable to loan money in any other banks. So this actually gave people a chance to create businesses and let their children go to school. Now, in 1918, Ki-gun, as well as Yanagi town, were incorporated into Kyoto city, and in the same year, a rice riot occurred in Yanagi town, and 50 people were arrested. In 1922, the National Levelers Association was founded in Kyoto, and for their inauguration, 1,000 people came from discriminated areas all over Japan. The goal of the organization was to fight discrimination. And as they created their declarations at the meeting, on the back of those declarations, you can see that Sujin was written as the temporary headquarters of the organization. Now, sadly, in 1927, the earlier mentioned Yanagihara Bank was closed due to the financial crisis, and the building served as a shop until 1994. Built of wood, it is now one of the oldest wooden-built bank buildings in Kyoto and was registered as a tangible cultural property by Kyoto City in 1994. Road widening threatened the building, but local preservation action led to the building being relocated to its current location, and in 1997 it opened as a memorial museum. The museum displays artifacts and records about the local history, culture, and lifestyle of the area. The Sujin area went through a series of interesting developments from 1950 onwards, and in recent years as well. To hear about these and the current state of the area, you will have to watch this video right here. Well, I mean, in 1 week or two when it comes out, but it'll be pretty great. So I guess you'll just have to subscribe and hit the bell until then. No, but seriously, if you watched the entire video till now, thank you so much, and I would love to hear what you thought was interesting. If you have any feedback, criticism, praise, please do tell me in the comments, and have a great time.